Get 5 coffins ready.
Hey, what's up everybody, Shenmue here, and today we'll be taking a look at the subclasses of Guardians in SMITE. So as a recap, Guardians are the melee magic damage dealers with lots of CC, who focus on being very tanky, dealing moderate damage, and having lots of CC. So how subclasses will be explained is what their strengths are, why you pick them, and what you miss out by picking them versus another subclass. And to be clear here, we're talking about like an archetype within a class. And there is definitely going to be overlap with certain characters, especially when it comes to what the character's strengths are early on in the match versus late game. So this is no one-to-one list of what's actually correct, because there is no correct answer, because subclasses and archetypes, they don't really exist. It's just more of a general idea, so that you know what characters are similar to one another, so you can say, if one character you've played and liked is like another character in the same subclass, then you probably like them too, and their playstyle. Alright, so let's get into it with Initiator Guardians. Now obviously they have either long range engage that hits a single target, or an engage that requires blink but is easier to hit. So say like a Sobek pluck versus a Geb blink ult. And of course once you get in there, they're the full package. Their lockdown is second to none. They can keep enemies in place longer than any other character in the game. Or the idea here is that they can displace enemies so far away from their own team that they can't avoid your team's damage. And of course a great thing about them is that they give you really good level 5 ganks. Level 5 of course being when you get your ultimate. So Geb's laning is kinda but if you have Blink at level 5 and your jungler's coming, it's pretty much a guaranteed kill every time because their lockdown is just that insane. So of course, why you pick them? You want to get CC at a range where your team has good ranged damage as well. Like if you have 4 melee characters, a hard initiator like Geb or Sobek won't really help too much. So they're really good with medium to long range mages, as well as hunters and assassins who can gap close. For example, if you get a really good Sobek pluck, you can just have a Hachiman dash in and stun off of that. Or have a Susanoo put their 3 onto the target you plucked, little things like that, where there's a true combo with their insane lockdown initiation. And of course if they can match your range too. And of course also you want to have these kind of characters when you already have teamfight focused characters in other roles as well, as in they'll be bringing their own CC and damage too, typically AoE based. But of course what you miss out on is that they're always reliant on Blink throughout the entirety of the match. They need Blink, period, end of story. But of course this also means they're bad from behind since they put themselves in so much danger to apply CC. For example, Blink Geb ulting or Blink Sylvanas ulting, you're right in the middle of the enemy team. So you just kinda gotta hope that the enemy team dies before you do in some situations. And also on that note, they tend to be a little bit less mobile, or to use their mobility to engage, like for instance Sobek. And of course just a general idea, if your teammates aren't paying attention, or you weren't paying attention to where your teammates were, and you go to initiate, there's a very good chance you're just gonna die. Even if you're ahead or behind, an immobile Guardian in the middle of the entire team with no backup is just going to die. So in that sense they can be a little risky, but betting on your teammates not paying attention doesn't make these characters bad in any way. They're just more reliant on team play. And that's where damage Guardians come in to stop all that. So their strengths are, of course, they have exceptional damage as well as tankiness. And of course this is because they have access to strong mage items if they need them. Little things like a Divine Rune for anti-heal, a Soul Reaver for tank damage, Curse Weaver for just being a terrible person, and so on. So they can have a huge tanky build, then have these one big mage items that increases their damage exponentially. And of course they still have more than enough CC to lock down targets if need be. Because of course these Guardians aren't usually played in support, they can be, but typically you might see like an Atlas or a Charon in mid, or a Kabrakan in the jungle for example, or a Cthulhu in the soul lane who's just been running it this year. And speaking of Cthulhu solo, man, they can be really hard to lane against. There are certain counter matchups, but generally speaking, Guardians have been and probably will continue to be some of the hardest characters to lane against in the soul lane in SMITE. At least these damage-focused Guardians. And of course, why you pick them, it's when you already have a good spread of CC across the team. Obviously, having more damage means that their CC is taken back slightly. So you're picking these guys when the rest of your team has already picked a bunch of CC, or even an Initiator Guardian in the support role. And of course, speaking of which, they can make up for a lack of magical damage elsewhere, like for instance if you have a Hunter mid, making it harder for the enemy team to itemize against you. And of course, also as I mentioned, these guys can directly counter the enemy soul laner pretty easily. If there's a warrior who has a really good laning phase, well, Guardians have the best laning phase, at least so long as Conduit Gem is in the game, so there you go. Or it's a direct counter, like for instance Cerberus into Assertor. So of course what you miss out on is that they have a general lack of range, thank God. They don't necessarily need Blink, but it is Initiator Guardian levels of, yeah, they need Blink to get in there and apply their CC. And of course, speaking of that CC, it's noticeably weaker or more difficult to apply. That is again because it has a weak range or is conditional in some sort of way. And of course, on those notes, they're pretty bad from behind. They can get behind, and then once they get their items, they can be swinging. But generally speaking, they're very slow, only moderately mobile characters who are also enormous and easy to hit. So all the enemy team needs to do is recognize that you're more of a damage-focused Guardian, and you're not going to be as tanky as a support Guardian. So they can just blow you up before you're able to put out your damage, or even get close enough to put it on. So that's where mid-range Guardians come into play. Again, mid-range means they're sort of in between the characters we've talked about so far, initiators as well as damage dealers. And of course what their strengths are is that they're very flexible. They can go from an initiator to a peeler to a damage dealer as the match progresses, especially thanks to items. You can itemize full defense with these guys. You can put a damage item in there. You can put pure utility items like Wingblade, Relic Dagger, and so on them as well, and they put it on like a glove. But of course, that said, they still have formidable CC and good damage with or without power items. And this is the subclass that definitely has the most counter pick options, as in characters you pick to counter what's on the enemy team. Of course, the biggest one here being Ares, who shuts down like a third of the assassins in the game. And they also tend to have decent mobility, of course the trade-off being that you use their mobility to apply CC or damage, but still, the mobility's there. And why you pick them is you're picking a Guardian early on in the draft and you don't want to get countered. So you just go the strongest mid-range Guardian that you can find. But also you pick them later on to counterpick as well. These are characters you definitely want to keep an eye out in case there's a troublesome god on the enemy team and you need to counter them. Now's your chance to pick a mid-range Guardian who counters them. But, and also just in general, it's a comfort pick for you. These are the characters I pick most when I'm playing Guardians, because frankly I just don't like the class that much, so I just go the Guardians I'm most comfortable with, and thanks to their flexibility in builds and versatility with abilities, I'm usually able to eke out a good match with them. But of course what you miss out on is that they're good at countering, but they're also the easiest to counterpick against thus far. For example, if you're playing Bacchus, Bacchus is great, but you can just get against an Awilix and never be able to engage. Or God forbid you're playing Artio and then they pick Ares. You literally just can't play Artio into Ares, so yeah, have fun with that. But also with all this versatility and flexibility, it's hard to know what to build on these characters every time, because you can't just build full tank every single match and then feel good. Sometimes they'll need things like the Relic Dagger, the Curse Weaver, splashing a Divine Ruin or an Ethereal in there. You can't just go one build on these guys every single match and then expect results. You gotta mix it up with them, and that can be tough when you're new. But of course, in terms of builds, Protector Guardians are obviously the easiest to build for because they're just full defense and a few counter items here and there. But of course, with Protectors, what their strengths are is that they have unique utility abilities to help a teammate. So let's go with some examples here. For instance, Maui 2, which gives you movement speed and protections, as well as your teammates in the area, and you're able to have a teammate teleported to you if they stay in the AoE for long enough. And of course you have Moja 3, which just lets you fly around the map if you need to escape or re-engage on somebody. And of course the legendary Kepriel, which revives someone as soon as they hit 1 HP and brings them back to Kepri. So obviously, massive utility and completely unique to this subclass of Guardians. The best we've seen so far is that they can heal or maybe just CC people off of you. Nothing this uniquely attuned to helping your team. And of course they still have decent CC. As you'll find, they don't have the best CC in the Guardian class, but it is still decent enough to get you by. And also these characters tend to be decent from behind, since if they were picked at an appropriate time, as in don't have a direct counter against them, they always have that utility that you picked them for. For instance, if Kepriel was good in the draft, it's going to be good in the game no matter what. And of course why you pick them is most of the time to protect a risky pick on your team. If you're playing something like Skadi, Amazon Cobb, Mercury, and so on, who need to pop off in the late game, it's a really good idea to have a Protector Guardian with them to make sure they can pop off in the late game safely. And of course this can be done by locking down a single member of the enemy team whose job it is to kill your carry, like Ganesh. Ganesh literally just sits there and silences assassins who are trying to dive onto your carries. Or they make up for a lack of mobility like with Yamoja or Maui. Yamoja basically gives any character in the game a small dash. And Maui, of course, as I mentioned, gives that movement speed and that teleport. Or you can just enable their aggression with Kepriel. Kepriel, of course, giving a high amount of movement speed as well. So, for instance, an AMC or a Mercury can just run at the enemy team with this revive on them as well, which can be really dangerous. But naturally, what you miss out on, you can guess, they have noticeably weaker AoE CC and very low damage in most circumstances. Ganesh can kind of pop off sometimes if he gets the combo with his ultimate, and Maui's damage is okay, but it's definitely the lowest damage so far. And also they tend to be more difficult since your carries need to be on the same page as you. If you, for instance, waste Kepri ultimate on somebody that doesn't matter, your team is just over, if the game is going the way you planned it. And that's true for most utility abilities. I mean, if you just waste all your Omi on Yamoja, now you can't protect your team. If you waste your 2 as Maui, you can't teleport your immobile mage or hunter out of the fight. So if you waste your utility, the character becomes a lot worse. Because as I mentioned, low damage and not the best CC. And they also tend to have pretty low mobility or need to use it to apply CC. Same idea as Initiator Guardians, but even weaker, because think of gods like Kepri, who has this kind of meager pluck that's good CC when you're ahead, but it's not the best CC if you want to, not get blown up. And same with Maui, a very slow, sluggish stun that is AoE, but it's so slow, it's probably only going to hit one person anyways. So definitely only pick these Guardians when you know there's someone on your team that you need to protect directly. So you can play off of them, and it becomes a lot more easy that way when you have one teammate you can look at and be like, you're my carry, I'll just put all my utility and peel into you. If you pick these characters every game, then you're probably not going to have the CC or the damage you need every single match. And sooner or later you'll realize, oh yeah, maybe CC that hits 5 people is better than CC that just hits 1 person. But that's it for the Guardian subclasses. What did you think of this video? Did it help you out figuring out the strengths of certain characters? Has it inspired you to find a new character to play? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.